Zach's ready to go.
I'm ready.
What's the plan, Stan?
I don't know. You're going to have to tell me that.
Okay. So here's the plan. The engine's on the stand. It has to come off. For it to come off, it needs to hook up to the hoist. The hoist is directly above the car. So the car needs to go out. Then we can wheel the engine over to the hoist, lower the hoist, hook it up to this plate that is mounted to the intake manifold where the carburetor goes. That's actually designed for lifting the engine. So we'll suspend the engine from the hoist using that. It needs to be turned 180 degrees, by the way. If you put it in backwards, the car goes the wrong way. So we don't want to do that.
Makes sense.
Then, once the engine is hanging from the ceiling, we'll pull the car in and center it under the engine. Then what we got to do is support the transmission. You'll remember we had it on blocks before. And then we will gradually lower the engine into place. These brackets right here are the engine mounts. They match up with these brackets right here. And it mates to the transmission. So once the engine's in the air, we're going to want to put the flywheel. It does have to mate. So you'll recall these right here have to go over the studs on the bell housing. Oh, look at that. Speaking of studs, it's the industrial injection.
I felt it was obligatory at this point.
This is my favorite t-shirt, Industrial. I've never ordered a pump or injectors from you, but if you could send more t-shirts, I'd be much obliged.
Has there been a video where I haven't worn it yet?
That's a good question.
I don't think there has been.
You should certainly be receiving some kind of royalty for that, right? At least a finder's fee.
Free advertising, another t-shirt maybe.
Hey, quick question. Is the only way to know if I'm on the compression stroke on number 1 to pull the valve cover? I'm timed, but I might be.
Can you see in the distributor?
Well, I'm trying to figure out where to put the distributor.
Oh.
That's the problem.
Distributor isn't timed.
The distributor is timed, except it might be 180 degrees off right now.
Run it.
Turn it, and if it doesn't start, flip it.
Doesn't start, turn it 180.
Okay. Yeah, did you understand what I'm asking, Zach?
No, not really. Kind of.
So the crank turns twice for each rotation of the cam. So if you look right down here on the harmonic balancer, there's a timing indicator. This is the pointer right here. So right now we're sitting at about, what is that? 12-ish, 10 or 12 degrees before top dead center, which is about where number 1 should fire without any advance, right?
Okay.
So if the distributor is pointed at cylinder number 1 right now, and number 1 is at the top dead center, or 12 degrees before top dead center, which is really where you want it to fire, then we're on time. Here's the problem. I can turn the crank 1 full rotation, and the cam only goes halfway, because there's the exhaust stroke, and there's the compression stroke. So I could be in the wrong position on the cam right now.
Can you see the valve?
Oh, you could do that, huh? Watch the valve while we turn it.
Maybe none of them are really
obviously open. I think it's, yeah, well, it wouldn't be yet. Now, because we're at top dead center, it would be closed. But if we turn the engine backward right now, and the exhaust valve opens, then you know you're on the exhaust stroke. We could try that. It was friggin' awesome to have Spencer and Zach join me for this little project. Spencer brought some brawn to the project. He also brings an element of know-how that allows me to spar with him about the best way to go about doing things. Zach brought his camera muscle and brought an element of production quality to the whole thing that we've really never had before. You can see him walking around with the big camera, getting all of the spectacular footage. I wish I had these guys around all the time. They're mostly at school, so I see them on weekends periodically. They bring an element to the garage that is a whole new level. So mad props to Spence and Zach for joining me on this one. You made this project a whole lot of fun. The project turned out really, really well. I was quite surprised at how cleanly everything went. I would say in terms of project notes, I would mention 3 things that are not well illustrated in the video. The flywheel is weighted and therefore needs to be installed correctly. I was looking for a pin or a dowel or something. It turns out the holes are not equally spaced, so you can only put the flywheel on in one direction. So that actually worked out pretty well. That was clean. The engine mounts really should be on the frame, not on the engine. That's because the engine, as it gets dropped down into place, will push backward as its last direction of travel so that the flywheel can go over the dowels on the torque converter. and the engine mounts make it difficult to do that. So we ended up taking the engine mounts off the engine and then putting them on the frame rails of the car, which made that last section way, way, way easier. Finally, the balance on the engine is tricky. I put oil in the engine before I put it in the car. I did that intentionally. One, I wanted to prime the oil pump with a drill, and two, I wanted to make sure I didn't have any significant leaks. Well, the problem with that is that it tends to put even more weight at the front of the engine because it's a front sump. I had to counter that with a rope to balance the engine a little better, get it to sit in place so that it would line up against the torque converter.
One more.
Turning again?
Yeah.
All right.
Right there. You ready to try engine mount bolts?
Yeah.
Yeah, how about you hand me some bolts? I might. How about 9 inches worth of extension too, for whatever size this is on a 3/8 drive.
The engine is in the car. Things are generally hooked up, some of it temporary. Specifically, this. I don't have a battery tray and I don't have permanent cables, so I found whatever I had lying around the shop and got it hooked up. So I have 12-volt power coming off of the battery over here to the relay. Starter does work. I've tested that. The ground cable is just hooked to the water pump right there at this point, and with this elaborate battery clamp right here, it gets hooked to the ground. Yeah, that gas just stinks. Even diluted as much as it is. I'm gonna guess maybe 2 gallons of old to 5 gallons of new, and it's nasty. Still has a stink to it. Oh, son of a... Stop it. Stop! Well, now, isn't this interesting? The firing order is not 154263778, as I long expected, and as was originally on this engine, and as is currently wired. The firing order on this engine is 137265548, which is kind of interesting to think about. The crank is the same, the piston movement is the same, but the cam is a little bit different. All it does is treat the stroke differently. Instead of a compression stroke, it's an exhaust stroke, and it swaps 5 for 3 and 4 for 7, and then on the other side it swaps 3 for 5 and 7 for 4. So half of the cylinders are firing at the wrong time, which would explain why I'm getting all this noise and potentially all the fire coming out the intake.